What's going on, guys? Welcome back to another War Thunder video. Today we're taking a look at the Ki-83. This is a Japanese heavy fighter, battle rating of 6.0 in realistic battles, as well as arcade. And the reason I mention arcade is this is where I recommend doing most of the upgrades. The reason I recommend this has to do with the fact that Japan is the least flown nation in the game, and because of that, you're going to get very, very small matches. Most of the matches that I get are anywhere from 6 versus 6 to 10 versus 10. Generally very small matches because very few people play high-tier Japan, or frankly Japan in general. But you know, if you're flying A6 M3s, for example, you tend to have fuller matches than the ones that you'll get at 6.0. Here they're very small matches. It doesn't matter what time of day. I tend to get the same results. So I recommend doing your upgrades in an arcade. It goes very fast, and there are two reasons for this. First of all, the amount of RP needed to upgrade this thing is quite small compared to, say, the J7W1. The J7W1 has almost twice the RP required per module. Now, as far as why arcade, it's because you get more opportunities for killing targets. There's simply more planes respawning. You'll get, maybe opportunities to kill a dozen planes, for example, if you use proper boom and zoom tactics. Here I'm doing some energy fighting and some turn fighting with this P-80. But neither one of us can really do anything against one another. I'm just a little bit too maneuverable for him, and I got just a little bit too much energy, and he just can't handle me. But he can just, of course, fly away. This is the problem with fighting jets in a twin-engine prop. Although the plane is very powerful, it's capable of reaching incredible speeds. It just can't compete for speed with a P-80 or the F-84 Thunderjet, which you will see on what I find to be a regular basis. This is a 6.0 plane, and those are 7.0 planes, and you'll see them consistently. You will, of course, have battles against props. You'll see a lot of Spitfires and Bearcats, as well as Tempests. But it's really the jets that give me the most difficult because of their speed. They're incredibly fast airplanes. Here you see me going into a dive chasing this P-80. And this is where I have the most difficulties. I don't fly jets very often, and so I'm not accustomed to dealing with jet speeds. This becomes a problem when trying to aim your shots. The guns are remarkably accurate on the Ki-83. You have two 30mm cannons and two 20mm cannons on the underside of the airplane, right in the nose. Nothing is wing mounted. But landing shots is something that I found difficult, at least early on. Just so much faster than I'm accustomed to dealing with. You do get a fair amount of ammo. You have 320 rounds for the 20 mils and 160 rounds for the 30 mils. However, in my opinion, I don't find this ammo count to be sufficient for some of the battles that I've been in, and part of this is due to my horrible aim with jets. You can see me getting a little nuts here with the ammo. Spraying for some long-range snipes, but you know what? Sometimes you do get lucky, but in this case, not so much. The one last thing I wanted to point out in this particular match is the engine temperatures in the upper left-hand corner. You see the oil is blinking bright red, and just all kinds of bad things are happening to my engines. If you haven't done so already, I recommend learning manual engine controls. Doing so will allow you to open your radiators for most of, if not the entire match, if that's what you want to do. It gives you more customization over how you fly your plane, and what this will do is add some longevity to your engines. Because you're flying against Bearcats, Tempests, and jets, I find myself weaping the engines a lot more than I would at, say, a mid or lower tier aircraft. Because you not only need speed for diving after an opponent, but you also need to be climbing. You need to climb like nuts in this thing, because you have to deal with some very capable airplanes. I have battled up to, and I'm not kidding here, 11.5 kilometers. I've fought P-51s at 11 kilometers. It's just nuts. You have to climb, and climb some more. In order to get up to those altitudes, you're going to have to wep your engines, and in order to get that far, you're going to have to use manual engine controls, otherwise you'll end up burning out your engines. And as far as manual engine controls, I recommend leaving the mixture at the default setting, which I believe is 60%. If you go above that, it'll end up being too high of a mixture. It'll be too rich. And this is something that I discovered when playing around with the settings myself. I got up to about 71 or 7200 meters, and the engine just started dying on me. In this clip, I find myself against a P-80 who is completely unaware of my presence. You always have to be watching your surroundings. You always have to be watching above you. And you used to see those 20 and 30 mils just cut right through his wing without any difficulty, really. Now, as far as how to fly this plane, I recommend flying it as a boom and zoomer, just like you would a Focke-Wulf, for example. Here you see me diving on a F8F. He was engaged with a R2Y2. You will have a lot of battles with R2Y2s in your matches because of the fact that they're 7.0, and a lot of people like to fly the R2Y2s. They're a terrific jet, and all I get here is a crit. You see, as I pull up, the plane does compress quite a bit. The elevator is not particularly strong, so using this as a traditional energy fighter, just a general energy fighter, is not something I would recommend. Instead, just use normal boom and zoom tactics. And here's another good example of that against this Bearcat. Goes up against an opponent, tries to do a split S to get away, but it's just far too little, far too late. If I hadn't gotten him, that J7W1 would have. And the J7 is actually a phenomenal plane. I recommend playing that if you haven't done so already. I actually feel that the J7 is a better plane than the Ki-83 due to the fact that it has 4 30mm cannons. It has better elevator authority, which makes it better in vertical maneuvers. And it has, and I'm not kidding here, even a better top speed before it rips its wings. And I want to get into that because I feel like this is a very important part of dealing with jets. You need a plane with a very high top speed in order to catch them. And so what I did was I tested all of the high-end Japanese props to see at what rate would their wings break. And here are those numbers that I promised. At the Ki-84 high, clocking at 790 kilometers per hour IAS, where the wings would break. Both N1Ks break at 800. The Ki-83 clocks in at 870. But the J7W1 comes in at an astonishing 900 kilometers per hour, which makes it a phenomenal jet hunter. Now, if you're going to fly any of these planes, I recommend writing these numbers down so that you can refer to them when you fly those planes, so that as you get to those speeds, you don't actually cross over those speeds and end up ripping your wings. I mentioned doing this in my Yak 9M video, and I highly recommend this. This is a really smart tactic. I keep a little notebook next to my computer, and I have all these little notes in there about where the planes rip. It's very useful. After all, you're going to hit those speeds quite often when you fly against jets. Props, not so much. Bearcats, Tempest, they can't handle those kinds of speeds either, really. Here's another battle against a Bearcat who's up at my altitude. He's climbed up to over 4 kilometers, and he's engaging 2 of us that are in the Ki-83s. However, every time he maneuvers, he ends up losing energy. Here he's going into a dive which picks up energy, then he blows it all into a steep climb. Then he realizes I'm above him, and he tries to turn away, but it's just too little, too late, just too slow at that point. But battling the Bearcat, it all brings me back to my dev server footage for 1.57, where I talked about the Ki-83. I was rather glowing, if I'm going to be completely honest with you, about how the Ki-83 felt to me, just in the little test flight that I had. I mentioned that it was fast, that it was sleek, it felt powerful, and all of those things are still true. The flight model, I feel, for the Ki-83 is arguably the most polished, the most finished flight model of all of the props that were introduced in 1.57. But also in my dev server footage, I mentioned that it was unclear to me how this would stack up against props. Specifically Tempest, Bearcats, and Spitfires, because on the dev server you're not really able to use those new airplanes against, say, a Bearcat or whatever, because most people are on there just testing out the new stuff. They're not flying out existing airplanes, so you can't really get a good feel for what sort of combat that's you're going to experience once the patch goes live. And so now that the patch has gone live it's actually been a while now, I would have to say that I'm a little bit disappointed in that you can't really compete with Spitfires, Bearcats, and Tempests when they're at your altitude. You have to be able to boom and zoom them, because your turn radius is not quite as good as theirs. The Ki-83 is a very nice plane. It's quite nimble considering it's an enormous plane. However, it just can't quite compete with the Spitfires and the Bearcats in a turn fight. So you have to have an energy advantage, you have to have an altitude advantage. Ideally you have both. And what I found, whether I'm flying as a Ki-83 or against the Ki-83, unless the Ki-83 has a distinct altitude and energy advantage, there's really not a whole lot it can do against those planes that I mentioned. The Bearcats, the Spitfires, and the Tempests. And despite the Ki-83 having a top speed of 870 kilometers per hour IAS before the wings rip, it can't outdive a Bearcat in the long run. It can't outrun a Bearcat in the long run, because the Bearcat has, for example, and this is actually true of a lot of planes, but the Bearcat has a better low altitude engine performance than the Ki-83 does. The same goes for planes like the Sea Fury and the Tempest, and of course the Focke-Wulf 190 D13. And I know just mentioning the D13 is going to have a few of you shaking your head. Why do you mention the D13? Germany and Japan don't fight. Well, they do because of mixed RB. Mixed RB is not very talked about. It's not something people talk about very often, but it is a problem, especially at this tier. Because remember, going back to something that I mentioned earlier in the video, of how Japan at high tiers especially don't have a very high number of people playing. And so you're going to end up finding yourself in a lot of mixed RB matches. One of the reasons you haven't seen me fly the J7W1 or the N1K in a while on the channel is because all I get is mixed RB matches with those planes. And frankly, I refuse to fly mixed RB. I just bail out of the match and just wait for the crew lock to unlock and try it again. And it's usually another mixed RB, in which I usually just give up at that point because I'm not going to fly mixed RB. It's just a matter of principle. I hate mixed RB, and I wish guys would listen to the community and get rid of it. But that's a whole nother topic. Oh my god. Let's not get into that. Let's go boom and zoom some more. That's a lot more fun. Mixed RB, it's a loaded topic. Just like battle ratings and matchmaking, it's not any fun to talk about, is it? I mean, we could do entire videos on that stuff. So here I find myself against a Bearcat and a Tempest, and I have altitude, I have energy, I have everything in my favor. And I'm just gonna boom and zoom these guys while I try to wrap up the Ki-83 review. One of the reasons I dragged my feet on doing the review on the Ki-83 is I was running into problems with teams. The Ki-83 is phenomenal as a boom and zoomer, as a support plane, but when your primary planes, your N1Ks, your Ki-84s, your J7W1s even, when they don't do their job and the Ki-83 is the only one at altitude because your planes all go for that initial wave of fighters and bombers who don't climb on certain maps, then you're really screwed. You are absolutely screwed. You can't outturn those planes at altitude. And if you try to outdive them, they're just going to catch you eventually. You'll initially get away, but the low altitude speed advantage that some of these planes have will eventually cost you your life. I would recommend flying this in a squad with someone, but not have the other one in a Ki-83. I would recommend him or her fly out one of the other Japanese primary fighters. I don't recommend the Ki-84 high, because at high altitudes the Ki-84 is a little bit sluggish. I would recommend an N1K. Either version will work, or even the J7W1. I feel like the J7W1 complements this plane quite well, and I actually find the J7W1 is actually a better plane than the Ki-83. As much as I like this plane, I find the J7W1 is a little bit better. It doesn't have the horizontal turning ability that the Ki-83 has, but its vertical maneuverability, its elevator authority, and its 430mm cannons, in my opinion, offer a very good complement to the Ki-83. The Ki-83 is a very nice plane, but it could handle a little bit of extra help from an N1K. The Ki-83 just can't quite carry a match by itself when it doesn't have a distinct energy and altitude advantage over its opponents. And there's one last thing before we wrap this up, and that is the damage model. I want to talk about this because it's important. Any kind of damage you take is going to end up likely resulting in a fuel fire. That's because this plane has enormous fuel tanks in its wings, so any damage whatsoever is going to end up making this go up like a torch. So avoid any sort of any sort of rounds if you can. Obviously, that's easier said than done, but it's something you have to keep in mind, especially when you're doing your bomber hunting. 50 cals, 20 mils, anything, this thing goes up like a torch. And with that, we're going to wrap it up here, guys. I thank you very much for watching this video. If you enjoyed this video, hit that thumbs up button. And of course, if you're new to the channel, please subscribe. Take care, guys.